When you picture New Mexico, outlaws and desert landscapes typically come to mind. You don't picture the sophisticated multi-million-dollar financial empires built by European immigrants. But before the railroads arrived, a highly exclusive network of Jewish pioneer families completely monopolized the Santa Fe Trail. They didn't just sell goods, they became the central banks, the military suppliers, and the supreme landlords of the American Southwest. Today, we count down the richest Jewish families in New Mexico history. Number 5. The Bibo family, the Indigenous Alliance. While most pioneers viewed the native populations as either an obstacle to be violently removed or a threat to be aggressively neutralized, Solomon Bibo recognized something completely different. He saw a massive, highly lucrative, and deeply misunderstood economic powerhouse waiting to be engaged. Solomon Bibo first arrived in America in the year 1869, eventually making the arduous journey to the sprawling New Mexico territory to join his brothers in their mercantile pursuits. He didn't just sit comfortably in a safe, established storefront in the capital of Santa Fe. Instead, he pushed deep into the rugged rural frontiers of the territory, setting up highly strategic and vital trading posts in the remote settlements of Ceboleta and Bernalillo. He quickly realized that the Acoma Pueblo, which stands historically as one of the oldest continuously inhabited communities in all of North America, produced vast, untapped quantities of valuable agricultural goods. Demonstrating an unparalleled commitment to cultural synthesis, Bibo learned to speak English, Spanish, and the incredibly complex Carasan language of the Acoma people. Through this linguistic mastery, he became their primary commercial broker. He successfully secured highly lucrative, long-term contracts to supply the United States military stationed at Fort Wingate, using the massive agricultural output generated by the skilled Acoma farmers. Bibo meticulously protected his rapidly growing wealth through absolute cultural integration and fierce, unrelenting legal defense. During this turbulent era of Western expansion, corrupt Anglo-squatters and shady, opportunistic government agents were actively trying to steal valuable ancestral lands from the Native American tribes. Bibo utilized his rigorous European education and his deep, tactical understanding of American contract law to aggressively defend the Acoma people in federal courtrooms. He legally shielded their sovereign territory from predatory corporate raiders. In the year 1885, he solidified this powerful alliance in the most profound and personal way possible. He married Juana Valle, the granddaughter of a highly prominent Acoma leader. By doing so, he inextricably bound his own financial and personal destiny directly to the physical survival and prosperity of the tribe. The ultimate flex of Solomon Bibo's extraordinary life occurred shortly after his marriage. The Acoma people, deeply recognizing his fierce loyalty and unmatched commercial brilliance, officially elected him to serve as the governor of the Acoma Pueblo. He became the political and economic sovereign of an entire indigenous nation. He remains the first and only non-native to ever hold such an exalted title in American history. As the newly elected governor, he negotiated a massive, unprecedented 30-year lease of Acoma grazing lands specifically to support his own massive, sprawling sheep herds. This masterstroke of negotiation legally enriched his own family while simultaneously and effectively shielding the tribe's vulnerable borders from continuous federal encroachment. The traditional Hollywood narrative of the Wild West strictly revolves around white settlers violently displacing Native Americans through relentless warfare. Solomon Bibo proved definitively that the absolute highest level of power and wealth was actually achieved through peaceful cultural synthesis and mutual economic protection. He didn't conquer the Acoma people with bullets. He protected his massive fortune by becoming the legitimate, democratically elected sovereign of the very people he traded with, proving once and for all that true, enduring power lies in the strength of the alliance. Number 4. The Floersheim family, the Woolen Land Barons. If the Bibo family painstakingly built their wealth through careful cultural diplomacy, our next frontier dynasty built theirs through sheer, unadulterated, and aggressive territorial conquest. They systematically industrialized the desolate desert. Saul Floersheim's relentless path to absolute wealth serves as a historical masterclass in raw grit and determination. After fleeing his homeland of Germany, He briefly worked in a sweltering, grueling matzo factory in New York before making the fateful decision to venture to the chaotic, famously lawless frontier town of Las Vegas, New Mexico. To learn the English language and make ends meet in a hostile environment, he took a terrifyingly dangerous job delivering wholesale liquor to remote, roughneck saloons scattered along the expanding railroad lines. This was a notoriously lethal profession where couriers were routinely and brutally murdered by outlaws simply for their valuable cargo. But Floersheim was exceptionally brilliant and fiercely ambitious. He rapidly transitioned from hauling heavy whiskey barrels to working as a high-level, sophisticated collector and salesman for the region's massive mercantile companies. He rode alone for days across the treacherous, bandit-filled plains, forcefully collecting overdue debts from rugged ranchers in the form of raw wool and live livestock. Eventually, having mastered the trade, he decisively branched out and established his own monolithic empire, the Floersheim Mercantile Company. Floersheim rigorously protected his commercial retail cash flow by completely and ruthlessly vertically integrating the entire regional wool trade. He didn't just want to sell basic tools to the local ranchers. His ultimate ambition was to own the very land those ranchers stood upon. He aggressively purchased the sprawling Jardis Ranch, systematically and continuously expanding its borders until it encompassed a staggering, almost incomprehensible 63,000 acres of prime, highly coveted grazing land. To ensure absolute security, this vast kingdom was fortified by over 150 miles of impenetrable barbed wire fencing. To corner and dominate the highly lucrative, high-end luxury wool market, he spared no expense and imported hundreds of full-blooded, genetically superior Rambouillet bucks. He used them to genetically upgrade his massive, sprawling herds to produce the finest, most expensive, and most highly sought-after wool in the entire American West. Sol Floersheim didn't just build an impressive ranch, he literally and legally bought out entire established towns. In the settlement of Springer, New Mexico, he executed a massive, highly aggressive corporate buyout of a heavily indebted rival land baron's entire portfolio of holdings. By simply signing those legal deeds, Floersheim effectively and instantly owned half of the town's prime real estate, the singular local banking institution, and all of the primary retail storefronts. If an average citizen lived in the town of Springer, they likely paid rent to live on Floersheim land, bought their groceries at the Floersheim store, and deposited their hard-earned paycheck directly into the secure vault of the Floersheim Bank. He totally and completely controlled the localized economy, maintaining a terrifying grip on everything from the specific grass his sheep ate to the heavy financial vault that held the entire town's life savings. When the modern public pictures typical 19th-century ranchers, they usually imagine uneducated, tobacco-chewing cowboys riding horses through choking clouds of dust. Sol Floersheim shatters that frontier myth entirely and permanently. He was a highly educated, sophisticated, multilingual European operative who wore impeccably tailored suits in the desert. He routinely negotiated massive, complex lines of credit with elite East Coast banking syndicates, and he treated a 63,000-acre wilderness not as a wild frontier, but exactly like a highly optimized, strictly managed Wall Street commodity holding. He didn't just manage to survive the brutal desert environment, he successfully corporatized it. Number 3. The Staab family, the Santa Fe aristocrats. While the Floersheim family strictly monopolized the raw, dusty dirt and the lucrative wool trade, the actual overarching geopolitical power in the vast territory resided firmly in the capital. If you truly wanted to control the destiny of New Mexico, you absolutely had to control the dark, backroom politics of Santa Fe. And historically, nobody executed that strategy better or more efficiently than the powerful Staab family. Abraham Staab first arrived in the territory in the year 1856 after miraculously surviving the brutal, highly dangerous months-long trek down the unforgiving Santa Fe Trail. Upon arrival, he strategically partnered with his brother to form the enterprise known as Zadok Staab and Brother, an operation which rapidly and aggressively evolved into the absolute largest wholesale enterprise in the entire American Southwest. They masterfully supplied the massive, sprawling network of active United States military forts stretching across the vast distances of Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and deep down into Chihuahua, Mexico. To truly understand the sheer, mind-boggling scale of their logistical operation, you must closely examine their historical financial ledgers. By the 1870s, the Staab brothers were consistently clearing well over $600,000 in massive annual sales. When properly adjusted for modern inflation, that astronomical figure is easily equivalent to tens of millions of dollars in highly liquid, heavily recurring revenue today. Frontier wholesale logistics are highly competitive and notoriously brutal. Abraham Staab methodically protected his family's massive cascading cash flow through impenetrable, elite, and highly secretive political alliances. Establishing his dominance, he became the very first acting president of the newly formed Santa Fe Chamber of Commerce. Far more importantly to his bottom line, he was deeply and fundamentally embedded as a primary foundational financier for the infamous and highly feared Santa Fe Ring. This organization was a highly secretive, deeply corrupt, and incredibly powerful political machine composed entirely of elite lawyers, federal judges, and ambitious politicians. This syndicate routinely manipulated massive, ancient land grants and entirely controlled the legislative actions of the territorial government. By quietly bankrolling the very men who literally wrote the laws and passed the judgments, Staab ensured his massive, highly lucrative military supply contracts were never ever threatened by outside competition. In the year 1882, Abraham Staab executed the ultimate, undeniable physical display of his absolute financial dominance over the region. In a dusty, isolated frontier town that was constructed almost entirely of simple brown mud adobe, Staab spared absolutely no expense. He imported elite master craftsmen, heavy slabs of Italian marble, and delicate French antique furniture to construct a massive, imposing, three-story brick mansion right on the prestigious Palace Avenue. The architectural style chosen for this fortress of wealth was a stunning, incredibly out-of-place French Second Empire manner. The sheer, unprecedented financial violence required just to safely transport thousands of heavy red bricks and fragile grand pianos across the hostile, bandit-filled plains via slow-moving horse-drawn wagons was completely incomprehensible to the average pioneer citizen. It was deliberately designed to psychologically crush the morale of his business rivals. Today, the opulent and historic Staab mansion still stands, serving as the luxurious and highly sought-after centerpiece of the famous La Posada de Santa Fe resort. It is globally famous for its popular ghost tours, as it is supposedly haunted by the restless spirit of Abraham's late wife, Julia Staab. However, this modern, lucrative paranormal tourism completely and tragically obscures the terrifying, raw financial reality of the era. The massive mansion was not built as a haunted house. It functioned as the de facto geopolitical embassy of the American Southwest. It was exclusively inside those opulent, gas-lit dining rooms that powerful military generals and deeply corrupt federal judges were lavishly entertained. It was there that massive, multi-million-dollar federal supply contracts were quietly and illegally awarded, and where the ultimate economic fate of millions of acres of sovereign land was casually decided over glasses of imported European champagne. Number 2. The Spiegelberg family, the frontier financiers. Even the deeply politically connected and fiercely wealthy Staab family ultimately had to bow in deference to the singular dynasty that controlled the fundamental flowing lifeblood of the entire regional economy. The Spiegelberg family didn't just quietly collect money from the frontier. They literally minted it themselves. The four Spiegelberg brothers, Solomon, Levi, Lehman, and Willie, were the ultimate highly calculated trailblazers of southwestern commerce. Solomon actually first arrived in the territory in the year 1846 during the bloody conflicts of the Mexican-American War. He was literally marching into the territory alongside the conquering forces of the United States Army, directly under the command of Colonel Sterling Price. Keenly recognizing that an occupying military force required absolutely astronomical and continuous amounts of food, warm clothing, and heavy ammunition to successfully occupy a hostile, distant frontier, the brothers immediately established the firm Spiegelberg Brothers. Through sheer logistical brilliance, they successfully secured the ultimate, highly coveted prize of 19th-century frontier commerce, the exclusive federal sutler contracts. They acted as the sole, exclusive, and strictly government-sanctioned supply chain for the remote military outposts and the sprawling Indian agencies. This unique position guaranteed them massive, uninterrupted payouts that were fully backed by the immense weight and full faith and credit of the United States Treasury itself. The brothers rigorously protected their sprawling supply empire by establishing absolute, undeniable financial sovereignty over the entire desolate region. The United States government in Washington was notoriously and painfully slow at paying its massive territorial bills, and physical, tangible silver coins were extremely scarce in the isolated desert economy. Because of this logistical nightmare, the local economy was constantly choking and stalling out entirely due to a severe, debilitating lack of basic financial liquidity. Recognizing this critical vulnerability, the Spiegelbergs executed a terrifyingly brilliant and audacious maneuver. They literally began printing their own sovereign money. They aggressively issued private, highly branded corporate scrip in various easy-to-use denominations. Because the trusted Spiegelberg family name commanded far more immediate, localized trust than the distant, sluggish, and often unreliable federal government back east, their private paper quickly became the de facto, everyday, foundational currency of the entire vast territory. They didn't just participate in the economy, they completely owned the money supply itself. The ultimate crowning graduation for any massive mercantile dynasty is the highly complex transition from moving heavy physical goods to moving invisible, highly leveraged capital. In the pivotal year of 1872, the ambitious brothers officially established the Second National Bank of Santa Fe. They installed Lehman to serve as the powerful president and positioned Willie as the head cashier. With this monumental shift, they were no longer simply selling basic pins, heavy pianos, and woolen military uniforms. They were now elite, institutional bankers. They totally controlled the vital lines of credit, strictly dictated the crushing regional interest rates to local borrowers, and meticulously managed the massive, highly lucrative exchange houses. These specialized exchange houses were exactly what converted localized, private territorial scrip into universally accepted East Coast gold. They physically and digitally linked the completely isolated desert economy directly to the powerful global banking syndicates of New York and mainland Europe. When the modern public casually thinks of frontier banking, they immediately and romantically picture the iconic, heavily guarded Wells Fargo stagecoaches frantically racing across the dusty plains. But in the reality of New Mexico, the Spiegelberg family simply was the financial system. They operated flawlessly as a localized, highly privatized Federal Reserve. They didn't need to dangerously rob stagecoaches or exhaustingly prospect for hidden gold mines in the mountains because they already legally owned the impenetrable vault where all the gold was ultimately and inevitably deposited. They proved definitively to the world that true, unshakable wealth isn't merely found in holding the money. It is found in having the supreme, unquestionable legal and economic authority to simply print it yourself. Number 1. The Ilfeld family, the undisputed kings of New Mexican capitalism. Every single historical dynasty featured on this list successfully built truly incredible, multi-generational fortunes. But they all, without exception, ultimately operated deep in the long, dark, inescapable shadow of one singular, intensely driven man. The absolute richest, most heavily powerful Jewish pioneer in the entire storied history of New Mexico, systematically built an economic empire so incredibly massive that it practically operated as its own independent sovereign state. Charles Ilfeld first arrived in the bustling capital of Santa Fe in the year 1865. At the incredibly young age of exactly 18 years old, he possessed exactly $5 to his name, stepping entirely alone into a ruthless, unforgiving wilderness. Seeking better leverage, he quickly relocated his meager operations to the rapidly expanding town of Las Vegas, New Mexico, where he eventually and ambitiously founded the monolithic entity known as the Charles Ilfeld Company. But his true, staggering multi-million-dollar fortune was not built on the simple, everyday retail sales that sustained his weaker competitors. Instead, his vast wealth was painstakingly built on the ruthless, calculating perfection of the infamous partido system. This complex arrangement was a highly lucrative, yet deeply and fundamentally exploitative, form of agricultural livestock sharecropping. Operating with cold efficiency, Ilfeld leased out massive, sprawling herds of his own privately owned sheep to desperate, local Hispanic ranchers. Under the strict, legally binding terms of these contracts, the ranchers bore 100% of the immense physical, brutal environmental, and crushing financial risks required to keep the fragile animals alive in a notoriously unforgiving climate. In direct return for providing the initial livestock capital, Ilfeld legally guaranteed himself a massive, fixed, and totally non-negotiable percentage of the annual wool shear, as well as a strict quota of all the newborn lambs. Through this brilliant but brutal legal architecture, he completely and totally monopolized the vast agricultural output of the entire sprawling territory without ever having to step out into the dirt to shear a single sheep himself. Ilfeld rigorously protected his rapidly sprawling mercantile empire through relentless, aggressive corporate franchising and highly strict, deeply protective familial nepotism. As the company's logistical operations rapidly expanded across the desert, he keenly realized that he could not possibly manage the vast, sprawling distances entirely alone. To solve this, he immediately brought over his exceptionally brilliant, highly analytical 18-year-old brother-in-law, Max Nordhaus, importing him directly from Germany to serve as his ultimate lieutenant. Working seamlessly together, the two men aggressively established complex branch operations and massive general stores in absolutely every single strategic rail hub and vital trading post located across the entire state. They successfully created an inescapable, heavily fortified, and flawlessly vertically integrated mercantile web. If a local rancher desperately needed heavy tools, they had absolutely no choice but to buy them directly from Ilfeld. If that same rancher needed a financial loan to survive the winter, they were forced to borrow it directly from Ilfeld. And finally, when the spring arrived and they needed to sell their valuable wool, they were contractually forced to sell it right back to Ilfeld, just to pay off their mounting, inescapable debt. It was a completely unbreakable, ruthlessly closed-loop financial ecosystem designed to extract maximum, continuous wealth. The ultimate existential test of all the great pioneer families finally occurred in the pivotal year of 1879 when the massive Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad finally laid its heavy iron tracks directly across the territory. The traditional, old-school, wagon-based trail merchants immediately panicked at the sight of the trains. Many of them quickly went completely bankrupt, utterly unable to culturally or economically adapt to the sudden, overwhelming influx of cheap, mass-produced Eastern goods flooding their markets. Charles Ilfeld, operating with terrifying foresight, did the exact opposite. He aggressively weaponized the newly built railroad against his rivals. He utilized his massive, unparalleled capital reserves to rapidly construct enormous, multi-story, heavily fortified concrete and steel warehouses, such as the massive, legendary Ilfeld warehouse located in Albuquerque. These sprawling, monolithic facilities essentially operated exactly like the highly optimized Amazon fulfillment centers of the 19th century. He ruthlessly imported industrial, staggering, and unprecedented quantities of heavy goods from the highly developed East Coast directly via the new rail lines. He stored them safely in his impenetrable, heavily guarded fortresses, and then systematically distributed them across his vast retail network with terrifying, completely unprecedented speed and ruthless efficiency. By doing this, he systematically choked out and destroyed every single independent competitor who lacked his massive capital and advanced logistical infrastructure. The entire, deeply romanticized cultural mythology of the American Wild West strictly revolves around the fictionalized lone gunslinger, the rugged, independent sheriff, and the daring, romantic outlaw holding up the speeding train. Charles Ilfeld proved with cold, hard economics that the man holding the gun ultimately and inevitably works for the man who legally owns the warehouse. He meticulously built an unstoppable economic leviathan that strictly dictated the absolute financial survival of entire localized towns and heavily controlled the daily livelihoods of thousands upon thousands of citizens. He didn't just conquer the harsh frontier with a primitive six-shooter. He completely and totally corporate franchised the desert, permanently cementing his untouchable, historic legacy as the singular, undisputed king of New Mexican capitalism. The history of New Mexico wasn't shaped by gunslingers, It was built by the quiet, ruthless brilliance of Jewish merchants who turned a desert frontier into a commercial empire. Which of these frontier dynasties impressed you the most? Let me know in the comments. If you want to understand who really built the world, like and subscribe to Global Status. We track the money.